So let's kick off our very first panel for the morning, and we'll begin by teasing out how exponential changes in technology will affect your retail business. What do people like now, and what platforms are they using to acquire it? And moderating this piece is Andrew Barnes, who I did confuse for a former colleague of mine at ENCA. Not the same Andrew Barnes. Andrew Barnes is the head of strategy for Ebony and Ivory, and he'll kick off our next panel. It's over to you, and please give him a warm round of applause.
You know, the conversation here yesterday was so negative. I wonder if that's caused a couple of people not to come back. Normally it's because I've said something, but I haven't said anything yet. And why it's important is because I'm actually going to start with a very positive story. This lady, her name is Emily Weiss. She worked as a young junior writer for Vogue magazine in New York. She also had a blog, and she communicated with a whole lot of people in America, a whole lot of women, giving them beauty advice. After a while, she decided she had such a good relationship with these ladies that she would sell some product to them. And so Glossier Cosmetics was born. And now, a couple of years later, Glossier has over 10 million page views per month, 2.1 million Instagram followers, a $1.2 billion valuation, and over $100 million in sales. And that's all since 2014. $100 million in sales is about 1.5 billion rand, you know, at current rates. It's just a phenomenal story, and there's so many stories like this emerging in America. You know, but the question is, where are we now in retail? And maybe it's not as pretty as Emily Weiss. Some of these figures you've seen before, I'll just go through them very rapidly. Trading density should be around about 4,000 rand a square meter, adjusted for inflation. Of course, this hasn't happened. We're sitting under 3,000 rand. That's a 28% deficit. So in real terms, trading densities are dropping. We know that. It's a fact. This is shared by Broll Research. Often quoted is retail space per person. And here you can see America as the outlier, 25 square feet per person. And I've got this in square feet because, I don't know, America just hasn't caught up with the rest of the world, and it was easier to use square feet. 10.7 square feet in a square meter, if you need to know. But South Africa looks very pretty amongst these developed countries at 4.5 square feet. It's about half a square meter. But bear in mind, we're not a developed country, and if we compare South Africa to the rest of Africa, a different picture emerges. But square feet or square meters per person is not a good indicator. We really want to see the money that's flowing into each of these square feet. And here immediately, if we look at the amount of space required for $1,000 of spend, straight away South Africa is a dramatic outlier with 3 to 4 times the retail space than these other developed countries. It's just not a healthy situation. And again, in terms of Africa, the situation would be a lot worse. Right now in America, stores are closing. In 2017, there were over 8,000 store closures. In 2018, you know, close to 6,000. In 2019, now we're only halfway through the year, they've already announced over 5,900. So it's coming. It's coming like a steam train. 20 to 25% of all malls will close in America. I'm sure you've seen the pictures. They actually don't close them, they just walk away. They're just derelict. Other experts put the figure at around about 30%. In UK, the situation is a little different. It's actually high street shopping, it's not malls. Also close to 6,000 will close or did close in 2018. There are those that say, but there are a lot of store openings. Over 3,000 open, but it's never the same, and they tend to be discounters and they're small stores. And the net outcome is still close to 7 stores closing in the UK every day, and that includes Saturdays and Sundays. Here in South Africa, it's not the same, obviously we know, but there are store closures, and we chatted to Sim Chabalala of Standard Bank. There were some really penetrating questions asked of him. They're closing over 100 branches, and that's retail as well. That's retail banking, so it's right here. That's what they announced recently. What I know is Standard Bank has closed probably as many branches in the last 3 to 4 years, but they didn't tell anyone about it. So this is happening. Famous Brands is closing a lot of branches. I think Famous Brands is the one where the share price is it Famous Brands? One of them where the share price has collapsed. Edgar's is going to close a lot of branches. Any Edgar store that is not 5,000 meters square is going to close. Jet, they've got their same ideal size, and they're going to close the rest. So it's coming. This is Hamleys in Mall of Africa right now. Woolworths in Melrose Arch is closing. This is retail sales. So of course, this is the bad news, but there's an upside. You've seen these figures. I think they were indicated in an earlier presentation. I show it again because what surprises me is the effect of Black Friday. Look at those Black Friday peaks. You know, if we do a simple linear extrapolation, in the future stores will only open for one day in the year. It also speaks volumes to the kind of trade deals that people are looking for. They're looking for discounts. This is A.T. Kearney, retail specialists, and they plot South Africa on two axes, one economic and political risk on the vertical axis on the left, and you can see South Africa is right at the top. And in terms of market potential, South Africa is right at the bottom. So again, compared to these developing nations, we're definitely probably in the worst position. They say South Africa is in this position. The window of opportunity is closing for retail because there's too much competition. It's too fierce. There's not enough good space. And we're just in a rather invidious position. So we've identified 4 factors that impact these changes in retail, and I'm going to go through them hopefully pretty quickly. The first one is cash constraints, and a lot has been said about this also in the previous day. We're all poorer now. It's a fact. One of the things that didn't come out from the economists yesterday is that administered costs are one of the biggest drivers of our cost of living. All the rates and taxes and the airport fees and the toll roads, they all take a dramatic impact on our discretionary income, and we feel it. So even though we might be 11% down in terms of real incomes, it feels a lot worse. You know, I've read reports where they say the middle class is disappearing. We're all lower class now. This is a picture. And just for those of you that are interested, Instagram has 5 million users in this country. It's coming like a steam train as well. And they tell us that people assimilate pictures about 60,000 times faster than any other communication. So we've had a lot of discussion about this. But I thought, here's the picture. This is the income distribution in South Africa, also expressed as a Gini coefficient. I think a lot of retail is based on averages, you know, average incomes. And averages never tell the truth, especially in a market that's as polarized as this. I think we've expected incomes to become more convex. They've become more concave. We've become more polarized. If you have a store and you have 10 customers, one earns R1 million and 9 are unemployed, your store will go out of business. But if you have 10 customers that earn 100,000 Rand, you'll be in business for a long time. So it's really important that this issue is addressed in this country. But we've discussed, as I said, something close to my heart. Brands and media are different. It may be something that is, you know, new to most of you. So I hope you find this interesting. These are ads from the 70s and 80s. They're really beautiful. There's iconic advertising. It was so easy. It was so linear. You know, you got a message. You translated your message into a creative proposition. You went to market. You put a lot of money behind it. You reached a big audience. And everyone had a lot of fun. And we developed really good advertising. It was just phenomenal. It was so easy. And it worked. And nowadays, it's all changed. In the old days, we called it outbound, or now we call it outbound marketing, because the new form is inbound marketing. It's about a conversation. It's different. It's really complicated to get a message into the marketplace. It's all about peer reviews, research, comments, influences. It's a really complicated funnel to navigate. At the end of it, you might get a buyer, you might get a customer, you might get an influencer who then charges you money to tell other people about your brand. Marketers and brands still don't know how to navigate this conversion funnel, as we call it. It's not like it was. And on top of that, in South Africa, I had a chat to a big media owner the other day. They've identified over 2,800 media platforms. You know, not long ago, we had a couple of TV stations, a few magazines, some print titles, radio stations, and so on. It was, again, really easy. Now there's over 2,800 ways to reach people. Audiences are fragmented, media is fragmented, and we know now as well that for the first time we see TV audiences in this country declining. So if you thought TV was the mass medium to reach people, that window is also closing, and it's closed around the world already. So it's really difficult to get a brand message out to the marketplace. And this is important because I'm going to talk about malls as brands a little bit later, hopefully quite soon. The way that people make decisions are different because they use or brand decisions, that is, because they use different processes and different criteria. And in that criteria mix is a whole lot of other things like ethics and reputation, sustainability, real need. We have a whole generation called the millennials. 1 in 4 Americans is a millennial. It's not that different here. It's certainly the same in Europe. And we thought they'd come and save us from this kind of retail quagmire. But now they're saying, if I don't need it, I won't buy it. So they're different to how it was certainly when I grew up. Next up, online. As I've said already, it's coming like a steam train. It's not the only reason why retail is changing. It's significant, but it's not the only reason. So I've heard people say, and that includes Grant Patterson of Edcon, online is insignificant, or it's the only reason, two opposites. It's a factor. It's not the only factor. This is online share of total retail. In China, leads the world at 35%, UK at 23%, and America at 12%. There's South Africa at 2 to 3%. So people like Grant Patterson say, well, it's insignificant. He's wrong, because South Africa e-commerce is growing at 20% a year. Some other estimates put it much higher. So in a couple of years, in fact, in a couple of months, there will be a doubling of this and a doubling again. It's coming like a steam train. Why I show the US and the UK and China is not because I want to show how different they are. It's because it's exactly where South Africa is going to be in a very short space of time. And the reason why that's going to happen, and I sit in meetings almost on not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis, and I have arguments with experts, and they tell me only 15% of South Africans have internet connectivity. They must be dyslexic, because the figure is 51%. 40% of the population, that's the whole of South Africa, are active social media users. Almost all of those on smartphones. Smartphone penetration running at 60%. Also, people tell me, it's only LSM 10 that have smartphones. We still got to communicate with our audience, our retail audience, on USSD. It's nonsense. They all have smartphones now. Mobile penetration in this country is at 95%. Those having made any online transaction in the last year, Hootsuite puts at 32 million and Statistica 21 million. It's irrelevant that they, slightly different, in fact, quite significantly different. That doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is it's a huge bulk of people. It's probably around about half our population have had an online experience. And it's confirmed by this fact here. Takealot.com, and this really surprised me when I saw it about a year ago. Takealot.com is the 10th biggest website in this country in terms of traffic. It sits at a similar ranking in terms of unique users. And there's different metrics that we can use to assess it. That's Takealot.com. Every day in our office, I see parcels arriving for this one and that one from Takealot.com. It's here. It's phenomenal. And we still kind of think it's insignificant. So I want you to meet Harry's. This is another great story like Glossier up front. And America is littered with these stories right now. You've got Warby Parker spectacles. We've got Bonobos pants. We've got Pat McGrath cosmetics, Kylie Jenner. I just forget all the brands. There's Casper mattresses, and now there's Harry's razor. So what these guys did is they designed the best razor. At the same time, a couple of guys launched Dollar Shave Club. You may have heard of Dollar Shave Club. And these guys went about the market or the marketing of their product very differently to what Amazon did. We all know Amazon is about the long tail. It's about having everything that you need in one place. These guys said, no, we're going to go to market with one product, one pair of pants, one mattress, and they made it the best that they could. And what they did is they took, and this is Dollar Shave Club and Harry's razors, took about 15% of the market share, and they've basically eaten a big slice of Gillette in the US. This is how the market's getting disrupted. Gillette can do nothing about this. In fact, Lever's was so excited about this, they bought Dollar Shave Club for over $1 billion a couple of years ago. So this is how brands are changing. And when I say brands, remember that every retail outlet is a brand as well. It's important to note this. So people talk about e-commerce and they talk about online. A better descriptor a lot of the time is direct to consumer, because these new e-commerce retailers, they design products with the consumer, with the end user. They often collab around the design, and they allow input from everyone. They design one product, they immerse themselves in the relationship, they own a lot of data, they manage the relationship intensely, and hence own it all. So it's really a direct-to-consumer proposition more than an online. And we know, and Tiffany is going to sit on on the stage shortly in this panel has confirmed it because she's been there. We know Amazon's opening stores now. I think Yuppiechef is opening in Cape Town. So there's actually kind of full circle in terms of owning the relationship. The thing that really drives all of this very quickly is search. People search for goods, they search for information online. And it's just a no-brainer that if you're searching for something online, you're going to buy it online. It's going to happen. So search is really contingent to the strength of any online offering. And we all search for literally everything online. Finally, community evolution. I just want to say at a human level, this kind of thing really upsets me. And I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. But I saw this in a Business Day supplement the other day, and someone had the audacity to write to appeal to locals on the broader market. And I just simply ask, is this the best we can do? Up on the wall there's Woolworths, Pick n Pay, Checkers, Edgars, like, wow. It's exactly the same in every town and city in this country. Do people really want to go to these places? And I'll leave it at that. This is a piazza in Italy, obviously. These cities have survived for centuries. They will survive for centuries to come. It's the essence of new urbanism, walkability, connectivity, increased density, green transportation, sustainability, quality of life. You know, this is what we have to look to build environments where people want to actually be. So instead of saying, I have to go and buy this at the shopping center, it's a place where people want to go. No one had to be here, but people want to be in these environments. We're social human beings. We have to incorporate these principles in the way we build our cities. So you know about mixed use. This one is a Taikoo development in China. There are a lot of them. China probably leads the world. We've got a couple of mixed use developments in South Africa, some of them not so great. You know, I'm not sure about Melrose Arch. We've got Century City. They're doing stuff at Menlyn. We have to learn. And what has happened, and this is what interests me, is that communities have created their own solution. While no one was looking, no institutional finance came and said, here, we're going to give you a solution. People just did this themselves, often in the face of quite hostile, you know, local government or metro bylaws and so on. They created markets. In the area where I live, I've lost count of all the markets. You know, from Fourways to Bryanston to Linden to Emmarentia, Greenside, Parkhurst, Parktown. Same in Cape Town. They're everywhere. I come down here and my wife says, we've got to go to the Biscuit Mill. We've got to go to Hart Bay. People want to be in these places. We have to look at them and find out what is motivating these people and incorporate them in our designs. And so, there has to be a shift from asset-centric management to customer-centric management. And it doesn't mean we drop everything we do, but somewhere someone's got to start thinking that at the end of this, there's a real person that has real desires. Just in summing up, you know, I've hinted at the fact that malls are brands. I said I'll talk about it later. This is now. I got an inline native ad. If you don't know what that is, you can ask me afterwards. It's really clever. Inline native ad. It's the first I've seen ever for the Long Beach craft market at Noordhoek. I thought this is astounding. This is what they've got to do. It was really interesting. Malls have to act as brands because I believe that the traditional anchor is no longer valid. Or if it is, it's only marginally valid. Malls have to set themselves up as the destination. And to do that, they have to create a branding proposition and go to market with a personality and an offer that people find compelling. Retail is tech too. Traditionally, we used retail in tech to enable the transaction. Very quickly, the tech now has to enable the relationship. And I've spoken to the guys, and they've got tech where they'll longitudinally follow a customer through a mall and track their purchase, and they'll give them dedicated parking, and they'll give them rewards. It's all great. It's not a solution, because it only talks to the people that are in the mall. You know, we have to actually get others back. So that's a more complicated situation that really talks to the first issue, malls are brands. And then finally, experiences build relationships. Everyone talks about experiences. And I think a lot of the time we don't know what they are. You know, we think if we build an ice rink, people will have an experience. Or if we put a spur there, It'll be a good experience. I'll just leave this with you. Online shopping is immersive, it's spontaneous, it's interesting, it's so data rich. It is, in short, a very good experience. So we have to look outside of our kind of known sort of experience to find the experiences that we want. And my last slide here, just a bit of strategy, because this is what I do. All businesses compete on 4 levels. They compete for relevance, they compete for preference, you have to be preferred, and then you have to build dependence so people keep coming back, and finally you can seek excellence in your sphere. A lot of retail in this country now and around the world is trying to meet the online, the changing environment. They're trying to meet it with strategies that attack or address preference and dependence. But they're missing the point, because a lot of retail now is actually irrelevant. They have to rebuild relevance. And I can say from my own experience, I think the Edgar's offering is irrelevant. I think they've saved 100,000 jobs. I'm not sure where Edgar's will be in 4 or 5 years' time. I don't think the offering is relevant, and it's under threat. Same for Woolworths. So retail really needs to look at relevance more than trying to build preference, which they do through discounts and so on. We've seen the Black Friday effect, dependence, loyalty programs and so on. They don't address the real problem. Thank you very much.
I really want to just take what Andrew's been saying and take it one step further. I have the great pleasure of my brother living in New York, so I get to visit him quite often, and I was there 10 days ago. And from what Andrew was saying about the Fourways expansion in Johannesburg, I rushed off to see Hudson Yards, which opened a couple of months ago on the west side of Manhattan. You would have seen pictures of the vessel. Some people call it the shawarma. That's there. It's basically Hogwarts in the 21st century. It's just a whole lot of interlinking staircases. A great tourist attraction. It's going to be one of those tourist attractions in New York where people say, okay, have you been to the vessel? Tick. You go there. And then I wanted to obviously look at the retail space that they've built around the vessel. They called it 7 floors of experience. It was a mall. So I put it on Instagram, and somebody said, so if you were disappointed in the experience, because I said it was not an experience, it was just another mall. It was a lovely, big, shiny new mall, but it was a mall. So they said, what should the developers have done to make it more of an experience? I just said, they shouldn't have built another mall, because it was. And exactly that with, to Andrew's point, it was cookie cutter. All the brands that you could find in other malls, in Fifth Avenue, in Soho, they were all basically repopulated there. So more and more of the same. However, one of the things that I'd like doing about traveling is proof of concept. So here in South Africa, we track a lot of the retail trends, and one of the things that were on my radar was a new flagship store for Nike on Fifth Avenue. So I made a beeline for that. So I did that before I went to the Hudson Yards. And I just want to show you a glimpse of what retail, I think this is sort of the best case practice for retail now. And this is Nike's flagship store, and they said it's the most immersive, the most connected, the most adapted for this day and age. And this is what it looks like.
The brand new Nike store on Fifth Avenue is stepping up the game for New York City flagships. Fox's Allison Morris has a preview of Nike's House of Innovation ahead of tomorrow's opening.
You take a picture of that QR code, and this entire look is loaded onto your phone.
We are going to be allowing our consumers in the mobile app to buy product in their app and walk out without needing to talk to us.
At Nike's new flagship on Fifth Avenue, the House of Innovation, you can shop 68,000 square feet of cutting-edge retail space without talking to a human.
This is the most responsive and personal store that we've ever built.
There are digital innovations and custom experiences throughout the 6 floors, all geared towards the modern shopper.
This store needs to respond to the consumer. It needs to move at a much faster pace than a flagship typically moves.
Starting with the Speed Shop, designed specifically for local New Yorkers, it has a separate entrance to avoid the crowds of tourists and all the basics you might have forgotten in your gym bag.
You can reserve them, send it to the store, or they'll be here. We'll pull them from store inventory, and there's brilliant lockers downstairs. and you come in, you scan your pass, your locker pops open, you can check out instantly on the app. You don't ever have to talk to a human, and then you can be on your way.
If you do want to talk to a human, book a private appointment in the Nike Expert Studio.
You can go really deep with our experts into running gear up and training.
Or drop by Cut and Sew to design your own clothes.
These looks have all been created. We've got the seamstresses ready.
On the ground floor, Nike Arena, you can customize sneakers while you wait.
If you want to make some small tweaks, you want to change the laces, put a debray on it, maybe swap a swoosh, we can do that here really quickly, 5-10 minutes at the counter. But if you really want to get into it, you want to fully break it down, customize it, do some dip dye, you make an appointment in our maker studio and you work with the designer, and we'll help you basically create one of one on that product.
The Nike Sneaker Lab has the largest collection of Nike kicks in the world with over 300 styles.
The way that the footwear is presented is a custom fixturing system that we designed called the Sport Grid. And what we wanted to do is really treat footwear like art.
Let's measure where we are in retail compared to where this flagship store really is. And the question is, did I buy? Yes, I did. So I'm not wearing the Nikes now, but this is another story on mass customization and online shopping. These shoes that I bought, I designed myself in Johannesburg. They're made in Lisbon. I collected them in London from a trip that I was coming back from America as well. So that's kind of the modern way of commerce and mass customization that is really possible. So you've, as Andrew said, there's been a lot of depressing stories, but I want to kind of unpack that from a Flux Trends point of view. And when we first delved back into retail, we've been doing retail reports over the past 6 or 8 years, and of course 2017 was a rather crucial year, so we delved back into it, which is why this presentation is called The New Rules of Retail, and Once More with Feeling. So yes, everyone says it's a sluggish economy, but I think it's a perfect storm that's starting to brew. So just taking you from left to right, yes, it's a sluggish economy, and that's not going away, and that's actually starting to really impact and get worse. Just on little levels that you start seeing little signals as well. I've got an aunt who runs a tuck shop at a school in Pretoria, and she said just the intake of how many people are coming to buy food, so whether it's a hamburger or that kind of made food from the tuck shop, has completely dropped because everybody's doing packed lunches. So it's just on the ground kind of feelings that you're starting to get of how tight things are. The one next to it, the bike sharing one, is about transient ownership. I've been harping on this since about 2012, and I feel like Cassandra, that nobody wants to listen to me, but I'm going to just explain that a little bit later. The tipping point of transient ownership, of rental, of car sharing, of digital mobility, it's all going to start changing, and that has a ripple effect on properties, because the more and more you've got e-hailing services, you've got digital mobility, your parking lots start decreasing, you need much more facilities for e-hailing, you need drop-off pickup zones, all of those kind of things. Online shopping, I'm going to unpack that a little bit more, the third one. And the fourth one is just that brand homogeny. So again, I go back to Hudson Yards in New York. Why build this spectacular 7 floors of experience and then fill it with brands you can just get everywhere else, and every other single mall with it too. So let's just go to online, and I want to make 2 points here, and just picking up what Andrew said. So everyone does the figures and says yes, but it's so insignificant in South Africa. It's only that 2 or 3%. I think if you're really confident about that. My point is, it's the 2 or 3% of not the 100% of the pie. When we look at South Africa and we look at consumer groups, we say yes, it's only 2% of that pie. But when we talk about consumer groups in South Africa, we talk about the 12 to 15% of taxpayers who make up the consumer group. So you're not talking about 2% or 3% of a 100% pie, you're talking 2 or 3% of a 12 to 15% pie, which means that is actually in step with what's happening. So we in South Africa are poised to where online was about maybe a decade ago. And as Andrew said, it's starting to go exponential, and it will carry on and just become faster and faster and faster. Once you've done it, the bug bites, and it gets very easy. And I'm not showing that video here, but if you look at Wumdrop, one of the services that were born in Cape Town, was bought over by Massmart, you don't even have to wait at a location, your office. It doesn't get dropped off at your home. You don't have to wait for it. It follows your geotag on your phone, and you get delivered it to the person. You get delivered to the geotag, not to the place. So that also shows that we've evolved so quickly that it's just too much of a hassle in the last 2 or 3 years to actually wait for the parcel. The parcel should just come to me. But more of that later, because the other thing that online has done, and I think that's what we miss totally. We look at the figures, we look at the numbers, but we don't look at the behavioral patterns of what online does. Andrew says once you start searching, you will probably buy. Maybe not, but you will definitely do all of your online research before you buy. So you will look for stuff and you'll start filtering out things online. And then what it's done online, specifically in South Africa, has created what I call stealth bomber shoppers. And I'm a stealth bomber shopper, and I'm sorry, property owners, I do not like malls. The bigger they are, the more averse I am to actually going into them. So a stealth bomber shopper, and a lot of people will nod their heads, is you find out where you need to get whatever you need in the mall. You park at the closest entrance possible. You get the hell in, you get the hell out, and then you leave, which means the entire design of those malls, the racetrack, and how you have to walk through the mall to just get that incidental buying and the window shopping starts disappearing because those behaviors are not there. So we're working with one of those companies that does heat seeking with your phones, and they corroborated that with us, and they said, no, absolutely, it started about 2 or 3 years ago, and at best, if you're a mall owner, what the heat seeking maps show is that you will probably go to 1 and at best 2 stops if you're that stealth bomber shopper, and then you get the hell out. So you're not walking the whole mall, you're not window shopping, you're not doing impulse buying, all of those kind of things. So that needs to be figured in totally. The other thing we'd like doing at Flux is looking at our tribes, and we've got New Urban Tribes of South Africa, which we brought out last year. One of the big ones, and this affects retail and affects consumer mindset in a huge umbrella movement, are the cleansers. So you are trying to cleanse out the Marie Kondo effect of things. I read something yesterday. It was quite interesting that she was speaking at an ad creative conference in France, and she got this rousing welcome. And the writer said it's really ironic because here's a woman who's advocating to buy less, being cheered on by a crowd whose job is to sell you more stuff. But there's just been this sway of like, just get rid of it. So less stuff, more stories. We don't want to collect that stuff. And you might say to me, yes, but we're in an emerging market. We're in a developing world economy. But the cycle, if you look at the BRICS nations, China, the Russias, India, the asset building of an emerging market, the circle of coming out of that is much quicker than developed markets. So yes, we'll be asset buying, we'll be conspicuous consumption for a while, but then that changes very, very quickly. The other side of the cleansers is another tribe. The big umbrella hashtag is the free from movement. And if you are in the food business, if you are in any of those kind of supermarket businesses, ignore that one at your peril. So the free from movement is a lot about moving to a plant-based diet. You see the rise of vegetarianism, the rise of veganism, rise of teetotalers drinks. So all of the beer companies are rushing to give you alcoholic-free beers or CBD-infused beers, and the one that I'm still not convinced about are restorative beers for runners after a marathon, so that you run and you drink a beer afterwards, and it's got all these minerals and stuff that will restore your body, but you're having a beer anyway. So, but that's just me. The one big flag that I have throwing forward into the next decade or so is transient ownership. So I talked about ride sharing. I talked about the fact that car companies are even discussing a mid-century or further scenario where car ownership will become a really ridiculous notion. If you look at the different ways of sharing, ride sharing, Drive Now, which are floating cars in one system. We've got our own in South Africa called Locommute. Have a look at that. That's it'll cost you for a weekend to use a car 70 cents a minute without insurance, without petrol or anything like that. But what is very interesting about the clothing retail is that the resale, upscale, sort of vintage market of fashion clothing has exceeded fast fashion for the past 3 years. It's grown 21 times faster than fast fashion. So something is definitely happening. And the case study that we use is a company called Rent the Runway. So not a miraculously different concept. You're basically just renting clothes. So guys, if you need to go to tomorrow night or tonight's dinner, you need a tuxedo, you need something, you rent that for the ladies. What they've done is they've got designer outfits there, the must-have handbag of the season. You can just rent it, you don't have to buy it. What is interesting is that 10 years after they started, they have 10 million people on their database. They've also started bringing on commercial brands, Levi's, J. Crew, all of these, Club Monaco, these huge big brands who are saying, okay, we want you to rent our inventory as well as us trying to sell it. So 5 years ago, that would have been an insane business model. People say, but you're trying to sell stuff for people to own so that you can sell them more stuff. For brands to now suddenly say, we're actually embracing the rental market is a very significant shift. And some of them have not just joined Rent the Runway, but there's a lot of them that are actually starting to do their own rental options as well. So the transient ownership is going to be a big, big, big thing. And the ripple effect is, at Flux, we're talking to insurance companies, because what happens to short-term insurance when you don't actually own a lot of the stuff, you don't own your car, you're just renting your car, there's a big ramification of what's going to happen. So let's just talk about digitization and what specifically malls and shopping spaces represented to us. So if you go back 2 or 3 decades, the mall was always the town square. You went there for coffee, you went there for movies, you went there to shop, you went there or drop off your kids. They would be able to be those mall rats that kind of ran around. Digitization has wiped all of that out. We don't need to go to a movie house. I'm also germophobic, so I haven't gone to a movie house for I don't know when. I jokingly say the last movie I saw was Gone with the Wind somewhere in a movie house. We Netflix, we stream. We don't have to go to that coffee shop or the food court because we've got other high street, we've got other coffee cultures. So the concept of that town square has really been eradicated, which is why you see specifically the Apple stores start recreating that town square. I was very fortunate to be in San Francisco the day after, or the week after, the first Apple flagship store opened up in Union Square in San Francisco. And if you've been there, it's a triple-story or triple-volume store that has sliding doors that open up to the square, so completely fresh air. They've got trees inside. They've got cafes. They've got learning stations. They've got editing pods. They've got a whole lot of things there, and they've created their own town square where people can come through and do that. So when we delved into the 2017 format of retail, the one thing that just kept coming up over and over and over and again, which will bring a shudder down to property owners' spines, is that the last mile of that shopper experience is on demand and is digitized. So I don't need to actually go to that town square. It can come to me. So what we started to pick up are a whole lot of different variations of almost meeting the shopper halfway. So a lot of click and collect concepts. So there's something on one of my trend feeds, a little a locker for people with chronic meds that don't want to queue at hospitals or queue at a pavement. Your meds get put into a locker. It pops open with a little PIN code from your phone, and you can collect when you want to do that. This is Walmart. What they've done is they've said, well, you can't click and collect perishable goods. So what happens if you order a whole lot of perishable goods? It can't sit there the whole day. So what they decided to do was create an entire building, which is a refrigerated vending machine. So this entire thing is a fridge, and you just go at a certain time and you pop open your locker and all your groceries and stuff you come and you collect there. Amazon's got the ones where you actually book a parking space within a 15-minute period or 10-minute period. You just put there in, you pop your boot open, you don't even have to get out. Somebody puts all of your groceries in, and off you go. So it's not insignificant that Takealot has done the same thing and created this huge click and collect zone in Midrand, just up in Joburg. Very significant that they've done that because it's got highway access, but the reason why they've invested so much in that is that the whole click and collect thing is going to be coming. So at Flux, it's interesting. We were just having this conversation before. 2017, I was talking to brands, I was talking to the retailers. 2019, we're now talking to you guys, property owners, developers, and asset managers about what to do with it. And one of the things I say is look at logistics and look at delivery, because that is what a resurgence in the retail equation of what's going to happen to that. So I want to take you to a modern warehouse, because a warehouse is no longer just a warehouse, but this is one filled with robots. It uses air traffic control technology to do it, and this is an e-commerce warehouse just for distribution. So can you imagine when 5G clicks in, what that's going to look like? So just what's the future of where we're going and where are we going with retail? So with all those vacancies, we're talking, if we go back to the EdCon story, if they are contracting 500,000 between their what was 1.5 million square meters into 1 million, that 500,000 actually equates to 2 Sandton cities. So that's just gives you an idea of what's happening. And with the banks starting to close branches, with digitalization, so you're looking at rethinking mall space. I'm starting to have chats with WeWork, who have started entering South Africa. They've got offices in Rosebank and Joburg. If you're not sure about WeWork, it's one of the biggest global co-working spaces. So when people thought, oh, well, gig economy, sort of freelance workers, it's just a little fad. If you look at the books of WeWork, they're probably going to be aggressively buying properties in South Africa. And again, on that trip to San Francisco, I stumbled into Westfield Mall, which is also a huge mall in the center of San Francisco, and I fortuitously went up to the top floor, and to my surprise, one of these co-working companies called Bespoke took over the entire top floor. So it's not just a co-working space. They also provided presentation rooms, so if you're a small business, you want to show something, pitch something to your client, it's a really fancy presentation room. They had meeting rooms as well, and then they had a huge space which was modular, so it was a conference space. You could run a conference, you could run a fashion show, you could run a whole lot of things, but really pumping into small business, and I think that's what we need specifically in South Africa. And then the big trend that came over and over again was that your relationship with your customer is no longer just transactional. In fact, just a purely transactional, bottom line based kind of run business is not going to survive. What you want is a transformative relationship. So don't just sell me the stuff. Tell me how to use it, why I should use it. So this is actually a baby shop in Korea. So we say, well, don't just sell me the nappies. Tell me how to handle this bundle of joy, and specifically young fathers. One of the most YouTubed requests or searches for young dads is how to change a nappy. So if you're a brand, you can go one step further. You can kind of do those services, make it a learning experience, not just a transactional experience. We saw at the Nike store that they're starting to lay things out like an art gallery, and this is actually a grocer with fresh food, laying out vegetables in a really, really spectacular way. But that also speaks to the rising plant-based diet trend and people going in for vegetarian food, veganism, all of those kind of things. But that's being elevated in a retail space to a very, very high art form, if you want. And then again, this was just on my trip 10 days ago. This is an Amazon bookstore, so this is one of those weird things where you go and you completely destroy and make a whole lot of bookshops close down, and then you start opening your own bookshops. So these are Amazon bookstores. And when I discuss this with people, they say, but then why would they do that? You know, you kind of created the Kindle, which I think everybody either uses or doesn't use, and then you go back and you start building bricks and mortar stores again. So I said, yes, but if you look at the trends world, it's like a pendulum swing. It'll go to one extreme, it'll go to the other extreme, it'll always then settle back into the middle, which is what this is. But the middle will never be the same again. And what they've done very, very cleverly at this Amazon bookstores, you'll note that there's almost none, but very, very few, but almost all of the books face outwards. You will never just see the spine of a book. So what they've done is they've replicated your online shopping experience and then brought it into the physical experience. So if you look at this one on the right-hand side, all of those nudges that they do online, if you bought this, you'll buy that. If you bought this, some of your friends that we've got the data on have liked this, so you'll probably like this. And that's what they do with this. If you like this, you'll like that. You like this, that, what. And then there's a whole big tech element, and obviously they're pushing a lot of Amazon products inside the store. But it's an analog and a digital worlds colliding in a very, very nice way. Then, for your younger audience, stores with no stock. This is an interesting case study. This is London Fashion Week, where Lego was launching an apparel range. And of course, they did this for not young millennials, but young Gen Zs. So in association with Snapchat, it was just an empty space, and people came through, and then with virtual reality or augmented reality, it would display and unleash the entire catalog that they would kind of drop. But on that, I want to shift and end this conversation about Gen Z. So my heart sinks somewhat when I go specifically into corporate environments and even in retail environments where they're saying, we're still struggling with millennials. That bus left a very long time ago. Your old millennials are your managers now. They're firmly into their 30s. Who you should really be worried about are Gen Z. So these are your teenagers from about the age of 9. The oldest ones are 21 or 20, and they are coming of age, which means they are not going to be not only your next generation shopper, but they're your next generation workforce. If you thought millennials were a difficult bunch to manage, here's great fun coming towards you as well, because the social justice barometer in these guys is really, really, really high. They're not going to give you brand loyalty if your value systems are not transparent and you don't have sustainability, all of those kind of things going through that. And if you think they're not going to give you brand loyalty, they're sure as hell not going to come and work for you if you don't push those boundaries of value and of transparency as well. The interesting thing that I want to leave with Gen Z is everybody's still talking about online versus offline. A Gen Z world is no line. So you've got to start thinking about no line shopping. Which means for a Gen Z, it's very easy to be in a physical shopping environment, but be on your phone, speaking to your friends, buying something, looking at stuff up. It's a complete mix of the way in which you do things, and that's what we should head for. And then I just want to leave you with one last video. It was beta testing in Shanghai in about 2017. You may have seen it. If you haven't, I hope this will impress you. But this is kind of where the future of retail might be going. A lot of the tech I'm going to show you is already in existence. Driverless cars, no human interaction in store. But this is slightly different, and take a look at that.
Hello Miranda, welcome back.
And on that note, I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
We're going to chat to our panelists. You've seen two presentations, a lot of different information, and I just want to kick off with Tiffany, if I may. You indicated when we chatted yesterday that you've traveled to America and you've seen what's happening in terms of the retail mix amongst tenants. Can you tell us a bit about that? I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So just a little bit of background about me. I analyze real estate companies in developed markets offshore that focus on retail. And I think it's very important to have a grasp of what is going on in developed markets, because I think eventually we will be facing the same realities, maybe in a slightly different way, but I think from a trend perspective, we will see those eventually trickle down into SA. So I think it's very important to look at what's happening offshore. I mean, Dion did speak in depth about it. But I think what is interesting is it's kind of assumed that you need to compete from three different levels when it comes to retail. So in the first instance, you need to have an online presence. And then you also need to compete either from a convenience or necessity basis, or then from a destination or experiential basis. But I think the lines between those are being blurred, and retailers are going to eventually have to compete from all three spheres and to do it well. So gone is the world of where you either competing online or in a physical bricks and mortar space. The world is omni-channel now, and retailers need to be aware of it and to be constantly innovating in order to give consumers what they want. I mean, I don't even think we as consumers really know what we want, and as Dion did allude to, the different generations all want different things. But what you're seeing in the US, which I think is a good place to start because it is the largest retail market in the world, and a lot of the headwinds that have impacted retail have initiated out of there, is you're seeing landlords change their tenant mix. So historically, probably about 10 years ago, maybe about 80 to 90% of tenants within a mall space were apparel. The really good landlords have made concerted efforts in order to change that mix. So it's been reduced to about 40 to 50% apparel, which in my opinion is probably still a bit high. But the types of tenants have changed. So you're seeing a lot more food and beverage, a lot more entertainment, a lot more experiential, which I'm not going to go into the details of what that exactly is now. But landlords and retailers are having to adapt very quickly to change consumer tastes. Sure. On the Gen Z notes, and yes, God help us all, they're turning 21 and they're entering the workforce. But I was quite surprised the other day, some information came out that the number of Gen Zs, or Zs as they like to call them in the US, that visited a mall in some shape, way or form. So they might not necessarily be spending in the same way as we have spent, but 95% of Gen Zs had visited a mall in the last quarter, which I think is very interesting and just kind of confirms how important physical bricks and mortar is in the entire chain of shopping and spending. Sure. And I think, I mean, if you look at that Nike store on Fifth Avenue, how physical stores are needing to change and how technology has to be incorporated in such a grand way, an interactive way, is imperative for the survival of retailers and for shopping spaces, which are becoming more like communities as opposed to stores on their own.
Yeah, sure, yeah, we see that happening. Itumeleng, as a fund manager,
Yeah.
How do you integrate these learnings into your management of retail space?
Yeah.
Do you actively
Yeah.
like manage it, or do you just take what comes?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Tiffany's point, we're seeing a change, and I think from our side is, you know, this omni-channel is something that's become a real reality. You know, in my office, I've got a front page of a Time magazine article that was issued in 1999 that says, you know, the death of the shopping center. And it's 20 years later, and the shopping center's still there. To me, I think, you know, what's happening is customer preferences are changing. With technology, you need to find an interesting way of trying to keep people engaged. And omnichannel is potentially, you know, one of those avenues that that landlords need to now start to consider. You know, so shopping centers, you know, in our view, are dynamic, always changing. And I think the primary issue that shopping center managers need to think about now is this issue around customer centricity.
Yes.
So in the past, what you know, shopping centers would do would be, you know, market potential analysis before you break ground. A year into the operation of your shopping center, you'll do a household survey and a shopper survey. You'll manage and count your feet and look at spend per head. I think we're now at a point where the technology is there in terms of kind of the fourth industrial revolution. Where now we're seeing, you know, you can use virtual reality to count your feet, you can use heat maps. So what kind of data can you collate about the shopper that the shopper doesn't even know? So to me, it's becoming less about demographics and more about, you know, how can we understand the behavior of the consumer, not just in terms of race, age, and creed, but in terms of what behaviors they display. So that you can try and find solutions that speaks to those behavioral traits.
Yeah, I think you're speaking about psychographics as opposed to demographics. Yeah. And sitting on my left is Barry, who's right at the forefront of the technological wave that we're speaking about. How do you see these changes evolving? How are they impacting your business? What do you see coming down the tube, so to speak, Barry?
Yeah, so one thing that we do see at Gumtree South Africa, obviously, in contrast to Takealot and Amazon that are full e-commerce platforms, Gumtree is still very much a classifieds ad platform where our main purpose is to help buyers to meet sellers, and the transaction invariably happens offline. So our customers are not only the buyers, but actually the sellers themselves. And what we're seeing a lot more of is it's sellers wanting to adapt their businesses to try and drive feet to stores. So very often they make use of classified platforms like ours, not only to sell their products, but also to get potential buyers into their stores to try and drive further upsell that can then happen in those stores. So a lot of our selling clients have made big adaptations to what they're doing in terms of their property space, because the feedback that we're receiving from them is there's no longer a need to have an enormous store as a shopping mall, but very often there's a drive to having many more smaller stores. And to the point that's been made, it's very much more an experience than just a shopping destination where you go in, do the transaction, and then leave. So we're seeing a lot more of that evolution as we go.
So I saw Gumtree's right up there, I think just after Takealot in those measurements, unique visitors and impressions and so on. Where do you see the growth coming from in your audience? How's it evolving?
Well, we're seeing a lot more competition coming on board, a lot more generic users that are making use of a whole bunch of different clients, but also the actual stores that are traditionally brick and mortar stores that are moving online, that are realizing that there's an absolute necessity for this hybrid model. So the competition, like there is for brick and mortar property owners, is not at all distant or absent in the online space. We're seeing a dramatic amount of increased competition, and we having to evolve as well. Even though it's a far younger concept, with Gumtree having been in South Africa probably a little over 15 years now, it's a relatively old tech business.
Right.
So we're also having to evolve as we see increased competition and find new ways to try and entice buyers and sellers to come to the platform, because our models traditionally are driving high audiences, high views, But in order to do that, you need to have an incredible amount of attractive and appealing content that gets people coming back time and time again.
Yeah. So I just want to go back to Dion. You know, you're the expert in the trends. This change in retail, how long is it going to take? Where are we on the curve? Are we still at the early adoption phase, or are we in the middle somewhere?
I think we just crossed the threshold of early adoption phase. So when I said, you know, in terms of online, and in terms of mall decline, if you saw what happened in America, to Tiffany's point, is, you know, we follow specifically mall culture very, very closely with America, and we're kind of where they were in the early 2000s of starting with e-commerce, starting to relook bricks and mortar, all of those kind of things. And I obviously understand with, you know, with assets, and it's not a we'll build this tomorrow. It's a very, very long period. But I think with what's come over and over again is the experience. And I think we completely overshoot it, or we miss the actual essence of that experience. So it's not entertainment. So just simply entertaining people is not going to bring, will bring some footfall. It's not going to bring more revenue for the tenants and everything. And I think, you know, in some of the work I do specifically with corporate, is when you look at innovation, I say it's not always something that's technological or something like that. It's more about a business model that needs to change, its structures and everything. And the same with retail. I think experience, if I think about all the experiences I've raved about on social media, the experiences that I've really loved have been great service. And I think it just kind of boils down to that. And I think especially if we are at this juncture where you are having to bring a lot of tech into bricks and mortar, you've got to merge all of this, and you've got to move to this no-line kind of concept of what Gen Z's like, then people are going to need more and more help. So the more you're able to put that human aspect in, the more you're able to assist, the more you're able to go that extra mile and do something for a customer that is going to be memorable, that's going to give you brand loyalty, that's going to really, really do that. And that is not always new tech that needs to come in. It comes down to those basic fundamentals of really, really, really good service, and somebody going way beyond just selling you that product. When I talk about a transformative relationship rather than a transactional one, and that's, I think, what we need to do, and that's a great experience.
I tend to agree with you. I remember in the old days, you got into a lift in a department store, there was someone who greeted you and took you up to the second floor or the third floor. I think there's still stores overseas where they'll greet you at the door, and it makes a big difference. In fact, I think yesterday I mentioned if all the service staff in South Africa in retail were just retrained to deliver really good service, I think we'd have a phenomenal industry. Barry, just back to you. You know, I know that e-commerce is coming to WhatsApp. It's on Instagram. It's developing. I know the new platforms coming. So the opportunity to buy online is going to kind of become a lot more ubiquitous. It's going to be everywhere. How does that impact your business? Are you looking at new tech to get into this kind of space, or are you going to remain as a sort of media channel, as it were?
I think there are a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of different things that you can do. And I don't necessarily want to use the example of Gumtree, but to Dion's point about the little things and the service that is all important, sometimes there's a real perceived distance with online transacting, that you don't have to engage with a specific person. But at the end of the day, there are still people in the back end that can provide that experience, even if it's not necessarily a human experience. So that's something that we'll certainly look at. And one example that I want to share is one of Stodels. So Stodels nurseries I found to be quite fantastic, and I'll tell you that it's a traditional brick and mortar. It's very, very difficult to buy plants online, right? So they have a very, very big online element to them. But the brick and mortar in that industry of a nursery certainly will never go away. And when it comes to service, it really is the little things that count. So when they moved into a neighborhood of a friend of mine very recently, they've probably been building what they want out of nothing. There was no demolition. It was an empty field before, and they did the development probably over the last 3 or 4 months, and they actually sent a plant to all of the immediate neighbors with a handwritten letter from Nick Stodel saying, really, very sorry, thank you for your patience with the disruption. We would very much like to give you a neighbor's discount card and to welcome you for a free coffee when our store opens and to come and meet us in person. And I think those little touches are amazing. They earn customers for life, and they don't necessarily have to not be available online. But they absolutely have to be available in brick and mortar stores to be able to make a differentiating difference to people's lives that will then get onto a forum like this and share that kind of story.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Can I perhaps expand on that? You know, so there's this topical discussion around EdCon giving back all this space. And in our context, I mean, we operate predominantly around in the rural and township areas where we have shopping centers. So we've taken back about 11,000 squares of EdCon space. And what we've let that space to is what we're now starting to call second-tier nationals. These are family businesses that run 50, 100 stores that do exactly what we're discussing here, where they've got that personal touch. They understand their customer, they understand the demographic, they're offering exactly what the customer wants, and they have touch points. For instance, you've got stores that are in retail that sell electricity. You know what I mean? But you need to understand the context and node in which you operate in. So we finding that you know, where you understand your customer very well, you're starting to see some sort of positives in terms of sustaining trading density growth, and also just offering something to the consumer that the consumer appreciates.
So that's really a change of mindset as well, right from the outset. I just want to sort of wrap up here because we're going to ask questions. We're running a little bit behind time. But you know, the heading of this session was retail make or break. Just in wrapping it up, Dion, what is your take on that? Is it broken? Are we going to make it?
I think it's broken, but it can be mended really if you look at it really differently. So again, just on this last trip, there was just queues and queues and queues outside a Uniqlo store, and I said, okay, so what is going on? What is bringing all of these people in? And what they did was a collaboration with an artist called Cause, and it was a new range of T-shirts that they just dropped there, and there were just the queues and queues. And I put an Instagram story up, and I just said, you know, retail's not broken. You just got to push the right buttons. So we really got to understand it. And then just quickly, I think the one big lesson I've learned over the last couple of months is what we're calling an integrated service pivot. And it goes back to that service again. So very quickly, you'll see internationally, if you hail an Uber ride, they're going to try and get you from A to B in the quickest possible way. It's like another app called Citymapper. But what is unusual about that is if the Uber ride is only for a third or half of that journey, then so be it. They are going to try and go the extra mile to make sure that you get from A to B as quick as possible. And if the slice of the pie is only that 20 or 30%, then we're still happy with that. And I think we've got to get over that. What is that whole bottom line? We want to have the whole thing. And what is the best thing for the customer to make sure that loyalty comes back all the time?
Yeah, service. And yourself, Tiffany?
I say I'm always the optimist, for a few reasons. I think, you know, the space of retail has always been changing. If you look at, I always use Simon Property Group. They're the biggest listed landlord in the world in the retail space. If you look at their tenant mix, top 10 tenants 10 years ago versus today, basically it's a totally different list because retail is constantly changing and evolving, and as a landlord you need to constantly be working on that and engaging with your tenants and making the space relevant for consumers. One example I like to use just very quickly is if you think about Apple, the Apple Store and Apple products. I mean, they've got a very limited range of products which are all homogenous. Like it would be very easy to just buy your Apple device on a website. Yet Apple stores are the most productive, per square foot, make the most dollar value, but more than any other brand or retailer in the world by far. And it just shows you that important value of having like a physical location as well. And what Apple do is they give you some of the best service in the world as well. So I think that just like summarizes everything we've said about the importance of service and giving the customer what they want, whether it is online or in the physical space. So I think the right retail will continue to do well.
Yeah, I actually tend to agree.
Everything else will fall off a cliff.
Every brand really needs a home, you know. It needs a place that it comes from. Yourself, Itumeleng?
Yeah, my sense is, you know, retail's not dead. Bricks and mortar are still very much alive. But I think what's happening in retail is we're seeing a dramatic change. And I think if you bring it back home in the South African context, you know, a lot of all these technological changes can change the consumer and shopper's daily operational life. So to me, I almost foresee a context where you'll get a bit of a J-curve in terms of the spike. Because, you know, for a grandma that needs to go stand in a queue at a bank, getting an app and understanding where is the shortest queue in the catchment area changes a life. So to me, I think retail is changing aggressively, and I think landlords need to start finding a way of integrating both the offline and the online to make sure that you provide the best service for the customer.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, just a parting shot from me that I've found to be a very, very good exercise is often there's so much happening right now that there's a sense that you are completely overwhelmed by what do we have to do right now to adapt. And a super useful exercise that I encourage you to try with your teams is to actually take the concept of driverless cars. Now, driverless cars almost feels like it's been done to death because it gets talked about all the time. The reality is in South Africa that we are quite far off, but probably not that far off. The sense that my 5-year-old may well never get a driver's license is not that distant. But if you try and do an exercise where you say, how is the concept of 100% or high 90% driverless car adoption in South Africa going to change industries, and how? And the deeper you go, the more you realize it changes absolutely everything. There's no longer a need for road signs. There's no longer a need for parking. There's no longer a need for the guy who supplies the paint on the roads that get you to where you need to go, because the cars talk to each other. They can drive far closer to each other. Traffic is more intense. How do the road concrete and tar and bitumen and everything need to be mixed to cope with that? It goes on forever. And that really frees up a lot of thinking with how are we going to adapt our own business for the concept of driverless cars? And the fluidity of that thinking has really encouraged us to try and think of what are we going to do right now, but let's get the imagination going for something that's probably maybe 20 or 30 years off in South Africa if you think of mass adoption of that kind of technology. So that we found to be a really quite useful exercise, that we try and cut through the clutter and not be as overwhelmed with everything that's happening at the same time.
Interesting, thank you. If anyone's read Nassim Taleb, who I really enjoy, and he's very insightful, he says, as much as things are changing, we still go to a bistro at night and meet friends and have dinner. This after 4,000 years, we still wear cotton clothing, same as 4,000 years ago. We still eat with a 4-tined fork and spoon, same as 3,000 years ago. So we notice what changes, but we don't notice what stays the same. And his argument is, most of what we do actually stays the same. It just changes at the fringe, and then we obsess about it.